Welcome back to Conversation with Cardinal Dolan. I'm Father Dave Dwyer. We're joined right now by David Bonagura, Jr. He teaches Latin and theology at Regis High School in New York City. He's an adjunct professor of classical languages at St. Joseph's Seminary here in the Archdiocese of New York, and an adjunct professor of theology at Catholic Distance University. He's the author of Steadfast in Faith, Catholicism and the Challenges of Secularism, and recently wrote an article in The Catholic Thing entitled Saving Catholic Schools. Welcome to Conversation with Cardinal Dolan, David Bonagura.
Hi, Father Dave. Hello, Your Eminence.
Professor Bonagura, you are most welcome, and we highly appreciate your company with us. And I'm sure your class is missing you and is just counting the moments to your return to the Latin classroom. You were on before, David. Remember, I think at the time I had you on to talk about Steadfast in Faith. That's
right. That was 2 years ago.
And wasn't there some article or book that you had written on Advent? That I had
that we talked about Virgil and Advent.
Remember?
You and I on this program a few years ago, 5 or 6 years ago.
I had you on. And thank you for teaching at St. Joseph's Seminary in Yonkers, our archdiocesan seminary. You teach Latin there. Are you doing it distance, or are you able to go up to Yonkers?
This year's distance. It's a Zoom year.
Yeah, but I appreciate you doing that. It's very important for our guys to have some foundation in Latin, as it is how impressed I am by Regis and by your students there that they take Latin seriously. Did I tell you, Professor Bonagura? We'll get to the topic in a minute. But one time I think I told you this because you said, I'm going to use it. I was at dinner, and next to me was the hiring director for a very prestigious firm in New York. I mean, a world-renowned firm that everybody wanted to work for. And he had the job of every day going through the job applications. And he said, if he sees that the applicant for the job took Latin in high school or in college, he puts them at the top of the pile because he says, I have learned that serious, responsible students take Latin. So you remind your guys of that, okay?
I absolutely will.
There you go.
My pleasure.
And even more the parents. I'm fascinated by all your books, Professor Bonagura. But what really caught my attention 2-3 weeks ago was an article that you had in, forget where it was, on saving our Catholic schools.
The Catholic Thing, it was called.
All right. I think that's a website, isn't it? Isn't it, Dave?
That's correct.
Yeah. And so when I first saw it, I thought, ho-hum, many people write articles on how better to strengthen and expand and make sure that our Catholic schools are secure for the future. But what caught my attention was you just weren't given a pep talk on the efficacy of Catholic schools. Indeed, you did that. But you spoke about a new model that you thought could really, really pump some energy and some enhanced attractiveness into our schools. Tell us about that.
Sure. That model is what we call classical education, and it's a traditional education in the 3 liberal arts: grammar, logic, and rhetoric. And of course, as the Latin teacher, I'm going to put my plug in here that for however many hundreds of years, the grammar that we're talking about is not just direct object and diagramming sentences in English, but it was Latin grammar. Latin grammar was the foundation of Western education for centuries and centuries, along with traditional mathematics. And we have traditionally taught mathematics. And we have propping up in different places all across the country these little classical school movements. Some of them are secular, some of them are Protestant, others are Catholic, and they tend to drive up enrollment substantially in whatever area they are. And that's because they are really strong on the foundations of basic learning, the verbal skills and mathematical skills. And more than anything else, that's what parents want for their children. Because by contrast, there are other options. Frankly, the public schools have given up on this model of education long ago, and they learn fuzzy math and they don't learn basic grammar. My students in the room next door listening to me can tell you how many times I've railed on the fact that they don't know basic grammar.
Oh, yes.
And it's not their fault because they were never taught it in grammar school.
It ain't their fault.
It's not their fault.
Yeah, David.
We might want to rename it from grammar school if they're not learning grammar.
Yeah.
That's
David,
correct.
but now this is all based on kind of a sober acknowledgement, and you're not happy about this, but you're saying, look, traditionally, Our schools were founded, our Catholic schools, the envy of the world, the Catholic school system in the United States, they were founded to help the children of immigrants preserve their Catholic faith. And while that is still kind of an appeal, it's not the, if I understood you right, it's not the lure or the magnet that we need to uptick our enrollment. You're saying what parents are most interested in is that their kids are getting the most solid, basic, foundational education possible that's going to help them get into a good college and land a good job. Am I quoting you right?
That's correct. We know that parents will pay big bucks so that their children will get ahead in the world or whatever it is activity they prefer. It would be athletics, SAT tutoring, music. They're willing to pay. And we have to be honest with our situation that we know lots of Catholics are staying home on Sunday. They're not living the robust faith life at home. So they're not going to be inclined to send their children to Catholic schools if they don't practice the faith. But if we can give them an educational product that they really, really want, then we have them. Mm-hmm. That's our chance as Catholic school educators to bring not only their children, but also their parents back into the practice of the faith. So it's kind of like a hook, a marketing angle, if you will.
Yeah. Now, it's fascinating because you were saying some of these classical education models are not even religious. Some are Catholic, some are evangelical. But some of them are just because parents appreciate a classical education. Could you point to any that you've been particularly impressed with?
On the Catholic side, the Chesterton Network of Schools is an excellent resource. And it's a model for you can have if you want to start a school in the Archdiocese of New York, you can contact the Chesterton Academy and say, hey, we want to start a school here in Manhattan or in Dutchess County. Can you help us with some resources and with a structure for our school, whether it be a complete reinvention of a school or starting a school from scratch? The one on the Protestant side that I'm really, really like, they have their own publishing house called Memoria Press, and they have a superb magazine, quarterly magazine that they put out called The Classical Teacher, with wonderful articles about classical education, as well as their curriculum, books that they put together, targeted, that teach classically. So you could just get the books for your schools and away you go. They have wonderful resources and great articles.
Professor Bonagura, would some of our homeschool parents be using a classical model?
Yes, most of them, I would go so far as to say most of them are, and that's a major motivator in homeschool, make the decision to homeschool. Yeah. A lot of these classical schools have come about as they've become conglomerated homeschools, and eventually they've formalized into bigger schools, institutional schools. But so often they started with just parents putting their resources together in trying to make a more traditional education, reading the great works of literature, doing math in the traditional way, doing scientific experiments from a young age, doing all these things that have been done for so many years, but have been abandoned by the educational establishment. They want that for their kids, so they try to make it happen. Not everyone can do homeschooling. Not everyone wants to do it or can do it. So these classical schools are just such a great gift to people that if we can give them to them, it's one of those, if you build it, they will come type things. If we build classical education in the Catholic Church, in our diocese, the people will come.
Yeah,
no doubt.
And there's evidence of that. Are you familiar with the Seton model and the Brilla academies? We have some of those in the Archdiocese. Would they be an example of what you're talking about?
Yes, they are.
Yeah,
Seton is very robustly Catholic.
They are phenomenal. They are phenomenal. Father Dave, we've spoken about it before. So they're charter schools. So technically during the day, they have to be neutral about religion. But they are, because it's a classical education, I mean, you're going to be reading St. Thomas, St. Augustine. You're going to be reading some of the beautiful hymns and poetry that make up our Catholic heritage. And then what they do, Father Dave, is after school, the teachers would then keep the kids afterwards who want to stay because there's aftercare, and that's where they teach the faith. And it's remarkably effective. Would you, I don't want to put you on the spot, Professor Bonagura, but is St. John Francis Regis Jesuit High School in Midtown Manhattan. Would you consider that a classical school?
I wouldn't consider it a classical school. It is a liberal arts school in the model of the 20th century. We haven't gone to STEM or any of that stuff. We're very strong emphasis on reading and writing skills, which is certainly part of the liberal arts education. But there's other parts of the liberal arts that we don't necessarily do, and most schools don't, only the classical school ones. That'd be rhetoric training and training in formal logic, which is also part of the classical model that it isn't done in most educational schools, and Regis does not do that either.
You answered my question. I was going to ask you to distinguish between a classical education and a liberal arts education, and you just did that, David. So, well, listen, once again, you have intrigued us, and I am open to anything that is going to enhance and strengthen our beloved Catholic schools. Would a school have to declare itself to be, we're one of these new classical education, or could they simply say, we're going to be a Catholic school that puts an emphasis on what has been classically held up for emulation, the things that you're talking about? Or do you have to kind of go full speed ahead with the classical endeavor?
I don't think you have to go full speed ahead, but I think the ones who have done so on the grounds that this is different and trying to sell difference and to tell people why this works. And so I think it's attractive to that. Certainly you could take any existing parochial school or high school and start filling it with classical books, and you change the curriculum in that manner. You wouldn't necessarily have to make an open declaration or filing. But there's something appealing about the classical school in the marketing angle, which if we're going to keep our schools open is so important. We have to tell people why they want to come here. And then once they're here, once they're in our Catholic schools, then we could show them what it means to be a Catholic.
Yeah.
Then we could bring them in that way. But if they don't sign up for the education, the reality is we're not getting them. And we know that every year we have to close schools and the enrollment goes down, and it's so depressing. And it's a disservice to our children.
Yeah.
But this is a great opportunity to think old and to be new at the same time.
Yeah.
It's an old proven method, but it's avant-garde.
Ever ancient, ever new. Way to go. David Bonagura, keep up the good work. We need you. And my greetings to your class.
Great
okay.
to see you. Thank you. Thanks, Father Dave. Great to see you both.
Take care.